Hey, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. Some interesting stuff's happening right now that actually hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. Somebody or some group is sabotaging America's electric grid. There have been, I think, over 160 attacks. This is not getting much coverage for some reason, but it's to the extent now that one, it's unusual, two, it's believed to be intentional, and three, well, it is intentional. A lot of these are actually physical attacks, and three, it looks like it's coordinated. I'm going to be talking about some of the evidence coming out on this. Right now, it's being framed as like a domestic extremist issue. There are some news agencies claiming it's white nationalists or whatever. That's based on only one case where in one area there was a drag show, like one of these kid drag shows, within like the city limits of where a station was attacked. If you're dealing with like 160 attacks, one area just happened to have a drag queen event nearby. I don't see how that's evidence that the entire thing is being orchestrated by, right-wing extremists. But that's the narrative they're using. There's no current evidence suggesting who might be behind it, but I can give you some ideas on, domestic terror threats that are actually legitimate. I'm going to be going into this today, talking about what's happening with it and maybe some of the possible motives. It's going to be an interesting episode. Also, folks, I want to go into some of the blackout warnings about the deep freeze and so on. This appears to be related. If you were talking about active measures, remember Soviet espionage during the Cold War. Soviet agents in the United States had two goals, two different assignments. One, poison the water supply. Two, destroy the electric grid. And I don't know if this relates in any way to the weird fires we've been seeing at food processing plants across the United States, but hey, it looks related. I'm going to be going into this today. It's going to be an interesting episode, so stick around for that. Also, folks, you can see I'm working from home today. Old school. Those of you who've been watching the show for a while, now this is actually kind of where I used to film my show more before I got the studio in the office. But you get my Christmas tree, and it'll be a good episode, folks. So let's get started. Real quick, those of you on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, thank you so much for being here. After about 25 minutes, we will shift over to Epic TV. That's our own video platform. We're uncensored there. We don't have to worry about getting strikes. And yes, they give me strikes all the time. So please join us there because, how should I say? I'm not going to censor myself, just plain and simple. So I typically will put the stuff that I know I can't talk about on like YouTube and stuff after the 25-minute mark. So come join us on Epic TV. I do an hour-and-a-half show. There's a great community there. Always a very lively discussion. It's really good. Join us on Epic TV. And that said, folks, let's get started. So first story here is from Zero Hedge. And they actually did a pretty good outline of kind of the broader issue and what's happening. Let me kind of give you the big picture first, and then we'll go into the details of it. So Zero Hedge said this. They said, who is purposefully sabotaging power plants all over America? Interesting question. And frankly, I'd question why we haven't really heard much about this. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Not 160, it's 106. 106, but there have actually been more since even this was written. In fact, Christmas Eve, I believe there were like 2 or 3 more. Let's go into it. It says, someone has been attacking power plants all over the country, and federal authorities are trying to determine who it is. In recent days, we have seen significant sabotage on both the east and west coasts, so it can't be just one individual that is responsible. During the first 8 months of the year, there were a total of 106 attacks on the electrical grid in the United States, and that represents the highest number ever recorded in a single year. Further in it states, ABC News is reporting that federal authorities are investigating this very disturbing trend. Federal authorities are investigating a number of recent reported acts of sabotage on utility companies, a senior law enforcement source told ABC News. And it says the move as well comes in the wake of substations being riddled with bullets in North Carolina, leaving tens of thousands without powers for days. After the incident, the utility companies reached out to federal authorities in recent days to investigate, the source said. Further in, it states, officials are calling this a, quote, intentional and coordinated attack. Intentional and coordinated. You getting that? In other words, there's a group doing it. They're doing it with the intent to destroy the electric grid in the United States, and it's being done in a way that they're coordinating with each other. Multiple attacks, multiple locations, and again, it's with the intent. It's done with the intent to destroy this. Somebody is trying to destroy America's electric grid. Now, we've been seeing. You presume that if there were active measures, they wouldn't be just involved with attacking the electric grid, and they'd probably be attacking other things as well. Keep in mind why you would do such a thing. It's because basically, if you were to, people talk about EMP, electromagnetic pulse, where, for example, using nuclear weapons generate EMP. That was one of the big things that came out from the early nuclear weapons experiments the United States was doing, which wipe out electronics. Basically, it's a massive power surge. The tiny electronic components in computers and devices cannot withstand that electric surge. It fries them, and because again, you have too much electricity coming through, it overloads them, fries them, and then keeps traveling actually through the wires. If the electric grid is then connected all across the country, an EMP, a nuclear blast, for example, in the high Earth orbit, you call that a HEMP attack, H-E-M-P. High Earth orbit electromagnetic pulse, detonation, right? It would wipe out the electric grid in the entire United States. One of the concerns, for example, you have is China's putting nuclear weapons allegedly in space on satellites and so on, which they have begun doing. And also concerns that other countries may have already done this. North Korea is even suspected to have done it. Remember, that was like part of, I believe it was Kennedy, when he had, was it Kennedy? Maybe it was Reagan, I'm sorry, when he had the Star Wars program, where during the Cold War he was threatening to put nuclear weapons in space, very much like that. The idea is you don't even have to launch the nuclear weapons. You just detonate them in high Earth orbit, and the EMP will destroy an entire country. Now, why does that matter for the United States? Different estimates say that if, for example, the electric grid in the United States were to go down, America would basically have starvation and die off within about 90 days. Keep in mind, people can't really go that long without food. No need to tell you all that. But, typically if you destroy let's say the logistics systems, the electric grid and so on, the processing plants, within about 90 days, you'd have a good portion of the country die off. And so, again, during the Cold War, there were active measure groups, Soviet spies, kind of like what you call the James Bond types, although they're not nearly as refined in real life, who were assigned specifically to do that. That was their specific assignment. The only two assignments we know of, again, was they were assigned to destroy the electric grid and to poison the water supplies, specifically around the D.C. area. Now, getting into what's happening now, I'm not suggesting this is a nation-state actor. I'm not suggesting it's a domestic terror group, but it's somebody. We don't know who. We don't have information on who this might be. Some group, in a coordinated and intentional way, is destroying America's electric grid. And personally, I believe that's pretty dang serious. I would hope they take it more seriously. I would hope that more media would cover this, because this is an actual real terror threat against the United States, and one that could actually affect people's ability to live, which in my opinion is a pretty big deal. Let me explain a bit more on this. Zero Hedge continues stating, who is to blame? Well, these days authorities seem to have a rule for this sort of thing, and frankly, I think this rule is a bunch of nonsense, as does Zero Hedge. It says, when in doubt, blame the right-wing people. Apparently, a drag show was going on at the same time that the attacks on the substation happened. One substation out of 106 happened to have a drag show taking place nearby. And it says because of that, right? Said so investigators are now focusing on that angle. An LGBTQ nonprofit in North Carolina had set up a drag show at the Sunrise Theater in Southern Pines on Saturday night around the same time when the electric facility was targeted with gunfire around 7 p.m. Folks, that's how they're doing the narrative. You had, out of 106 attacks across the entire United States, you just so happen in North Carolina to have one area where this took place where there just happened to be a drag show event happening like in the city at the same time. There's nothing correlating with this. There's no evidence suggesting the people who did this were involved with that. There's no evidence whatsoever they're basing this on, other than the fact that there just so happened to be a drag show event at the same time in one area out of 106 attacks that took place at the same time. That's the entire basis of it. And if you were to ask me, I think that's pretty dang suspicious, not on behalf of the people launching the attacks, but on the investigators. If they're now limiting their scope of the investigation on that, well, if it was 106 attacks and all of them had like drag events at the same time, I would think that would be pretty suspicious. If it's 106 attacks and a drag event just happened to take place at one of them, I don't think that's suspicious. But again, that's the way the narrative is being framed, and that's the way that the media is covering it, which to me seems ridiculous. And you would think they'd have better surveillance technologies. Heck, folks, they can track cell phones. They're still knocking on doors of people who are like in the vicinity of the Capitol building on January 6th. Like they're still questioning people around January 6th. They were doing cell phone capture. They had surveillance systems up. They were monitoring things. They're targeting people based on like credit card purchases because the credit card companies were providing information to the police or to the FBI, and they can't find people behind 106 attacks on, again, core critical infrastructure in the United States. And they're basing the entire investigation now around one area where there just happened to be a drag event. Like, I would guarantee you that if you look at these 106 attacks all across the U.S., you could find many types of events. I'm sure there were all kinds of weird events you could talk about taking place at the same time. Sorry for the noise outside. Taking place at the same time that you could frame different narratives on. Why do they choose to frame it on that one? Frankly, I think it's ridiculous. But that said, let's go deeper into this. Now, again, folks, this is happening a lot right now. 106 attacks. I want to go deeper into what's happening with it and give you some details on this. First, though, folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, folks, over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data or their online activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act, where the federal authorities can monitor your data. It doesn't have that. Secure does not ask for your phone number, mine your data, or upload your contacts, something more companies should be following in the footsteps of, in my opinion. And folks, it's only $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, and only $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or you can use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And folks, big things out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Let me continue on what Zero Hedge is saying. They did a really good job, in my opinion, on this. They really did a good job of kind of bringing the whole thing together. I can tell you there's an unfortunate phenomena in the news industry, though. And maybe I'm guilty of it too, where sometimes there can be big stories that develop over time. There's constantly new updates on it. You do a big one piece kind of exposing the whole thing, how the entire thing fits together. And then you don't really do like a follow-up where, you kind of like redo the episode. I mean, part of that is because people don't like repeat content. It's one of the unfortunate realities of news. People don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. But what that means oftentimes is that when there's a big story and a big developing story, people don't get updates on it. Or they don't see the whole picture more than once. If you miss the one episode, for example, where the whole thing is brought together, you might not know about it even. I do make an effort to do like news updates on developing stories, but when it comes to like the big one piece like deep dives, typically, most people won't redo those. I've been thinking of a way to approach that, but again, this is one of them. You have 106 attacks on the power grid. It's being done intentionally, it's being done in a coordinated fashion, and the investigators are, in my opinion, acting in a way that is inept because they're focusing on right wing extremists based on, again, circumstantial evidence in just one of those locations. It's not a pattern. Normal investigations would look for patterns. Why are they not following patterns? To me, this raises some serious, suspicions. And it makes me suspicious on, frankly, whether the investigators might have something to do with it themselves. There's no pattern suggesting that the LGBT whatever event had anything to do with this. There's no pattern. It was one location. There was circumstantial evidence. It just so happened to be in one location around the same time, and they're drawing their investigation on that, and the media is framing its narrative around that. It's ridiculous, in my opinion. That is not the way normal investigations work. And I can tell you, someone who's been doing, investigative journalism for over 14 years. That is not how investigations work. Why are they behaving in a way that is unconventional? Why are they treating this Why are they treating this as investigative agencies in a way that deviates from normal investigations, especially when it's something this serious? Frankly, it doesn't line up. Frankly, it is very suspicious. And frankly, it has me just frankly having doubts about the investigators themselves, if in fact they are framing it on that. That's not how you do investigations. Again, you look for patterns. It's not, the LGBT thing is not a pattern. It's one area out of 106. That's not a pattern. Anyways, let's go deeper into this. Because again, patterns demonstrate motives. Patterns demonstrate motives. If there's no pattern, you can't just make up a motive. You know what I mean? You can't just fabricate a motive like they're trying to do with this, and do it in a way that's very political. Also, let's go deeper into this, folks. It continues. Kind of Zero Hedge is noting now the LGBT angle. Hey, was this about the drag queen events or whatever? And this is our event singular, right? Because it's not. It wasn't like a pattern again. But it says this: that theory may or may not turn out to be accurate, right? Given the benefit of the doubt. But what about all the other attacks that have been taking place all over the nation? Just a few days prior to the sabotage in North Carolina, 2 electrical substations in the Portland area were attacked. In other words, the one they were framing the narrative on, there were 2 other attacks within a few days of that at other locations. Again, that is a pattern. 3 attacks in one area, only one of which had the correlation with, again, the drag queen event, and they want to frame it on the drag queen event rather than the 2 other attacks that took place. Doesn't make sense. It states this further in. Portland General Electric and Bonneville Power Administration each had a separate substation location in Clackamas County attacked. Did the same people that shot up substations in the Portland area hop on a plane and fly to the East Coast so they could shoot up some substations in North Carolina? Of course not. Of course, not the same exact area, but different areas, but still. Says something very strange appears to be happening. And a federal law enforcement memo that has been made public makes it sound like these attacks are definitely being planned in advance. It states a federal law enforcement memo revealed that the Pacific Northwest substations have described attacks using hand tools, arson, people lighting on fire, firearms, and metal chains, possibly in response to an online call for attacks on critical infrastructure. It states in recent attacks, this is a quote from the actual memo that the investigators are releasing. In recent attacks, criminal actors bypassed security fences by cutting the fence links, lighting nearby fires, diversion tactics, right? You divert law enforcement by, committing crimes in other places, lighting fires and so on, suggesting it's multiple actors as well. Lighting nearby fires, shooting equipment from a distance, or throwing objects over the fence and onto the equipment, reads the memo. In other words, these are people who know what they're doing. They're doing it in a coordinated way that also uses diversion tactics, which is a pretty big deal, right? And they're doing it in a way in multiple locations that are close enough in timing that would make it almost impossible for the same group in one area to carry it out in another area. Meaning, this is very likely a nationwide organization, or at the very least, two or three different cells operating in coordination with each other. I think people would look at, well, what types of organizations do we have that can operate like that? Some people might blame it on, of course, like militias, which is, I think, what they're trying to blame it on. I don't think there's any evidence of that. And frankly, I think most militias wouldn't target civilian populations. In my opinion, that in no way lines up. Typically, they're more patriotic. They wouldn't attack civilians ever. Which groups would attack civilians? Well, Antifa comes to mind, a group that almost entirely attacks civilians and has the capabilities for something like this, and also has pretty much the blessings of state governors and law enforcement to do whatever the heck they want without repercussions. I think they're a pretty big suspect. I'm not saying they did it, but I would say that they would fit the profile. Just saying, right? In my opinion. But let's go deeper into this. It says, according to the Department of Homeland Security, and this is how they're saying it, DHS, domestic extremists, quote unquote, have had specific plans, this is a quote, specific plans to attack electricity infrastructure since at least 2020. So the DHS claims that there are domestic extremists that were planning this. Frankly, Department of Homeland Security is discredited to such an extent that I'd have trouble believing they're doing anything that's not politicized these days. So who knows if it's accurate or not? But take it for what it is, right? Maybe it is the case. I'm not writing it off. Maybe it is the case, but we'll see. And it says, of course, this is zero hedge. When they say domestic extremists, what they really mean, typically at least, is right-wing extremists, because that's the way that they've been framing the label of domestic extremism. And further, it states, what we do know is that the number of attacks on our electric grid has been rising. Now, it should be noted that there have been attacks like this in the past. What makes this unusual is the frequency. We've never seen this many in such a short amount of time, to be clear. It notes nearly 600 electric emergency incidents and disturbances, which could be things not even just including attacks, but just in general, were caused by suspected and confirmed physical attacks and vandalism on the electric grid over the course of 9 years. That means less than 100 a year typically, much less than 100 a year typically, right? So there is some amount where it's normal. You could say that what's happening right now is above average, and again is being done in a coordinated way. And it says as well, there have been 106 attacks or vandalism incidents from January through August, suggesting that right now it may be about double of the normal that they're seeing. And it says, which is the latest the Energy Department data tracks. And it says, among the years reviewed by NBC News, 2022 is the first that reached triple digits, and it only contains 8 months of data. Someone's trying to destroy the electric grid, in other words. Bizarre stuff, right? Now, it is a concerning trend. Again, it's probably not being done fast enough to actually really bring things down. You need to kind of do it all at once in some way, or in very close timing. They're not doing it fast enough or all at once to actually have enough of an effect to really damage things. They're also, at least as far as I'm seeing, not really destroying some of the core infrastructure that would make it difficult to repair. It's probably just a bunch of boneheads out there just causing trouble. Hey, it sounds like Antifa, I'm just saying. But what's my opinion worth, right? But again, it's people causing disturbances and so on, and doing it in a way that is coordinated. So it should be something of concern. It should be something taken serious, in other words. Now, again, this is a concerning trend. Investigators do appear to be blaming this on political targets. They're trying to say it's domestic extremists, and again, media's framing it as right-wing extremists. Frankly, again, the evidence on that is not solid. The evidence on that is circumstantial and doesn't follow a pattern. It's just people using political infighting as, using an incident to try to frame it in the narrative of like political infighting. It doesn't line up in any way. And frankly, that has me concerned if there's no legitimate investigation. I do hope investigators are not limiting it to like, right-wing extremists, because it's not a legitimate investigation if that's how they're doing it, in my opinion. Now, that said, I want to go deeper into this, folks. We are going to jump over to Epic TV, though, for the rest of this, because I want to go into this and a few other issues. Some interesting stuff. We recently did another documentary. I'm going to show you, folks, when we bought Uncle Tom 2, not by us, but something we're working with. Folks, a great documentary. I can't recommend it enough. It is now on Epic TV. Uncle Tom, you might know, was about, of course, Black Republicans. Uncle Tom 2 talks about a lot of the history of Black America that you've been lied to about. And it shows a really kind of a sad story about how people who've been in the United States really since the beginning have been targeted with disinformation attacks to turn them against their own country, to turn them against themselves. It's a very sad story. But it's one that I think is important to know, especially as you're being fed a lot of false narratives around Black America. Really, this movie broke my heart watching it, frankly. Just seeing archive video of what things used to be like, how things used to be, and how we've been lied about it. You've had basically socialist groups targeting people based on their race, Black Americans, and trying to turn them against their own culture, their own basic values, and their own country. You have people who've been basically rendered homeless internationally, taught that they're stolen from their true homeland and they have nothing to do with this country. Really, they played a significant role in making America what it is. And if you want to talk about my fellow Americans, Black Americans are part of that. I think it's important to watch this documentary. It really shows what happened, how we're being lied to, and I hope how we can come back together. And we can once again look at each other and not see skin color, but instead see people of similar values who we have a lot in common with. And, when I was a kid, this was not a big deal. Like, honestly, like my group of friends in high school was like, the Native American, Mexican kid, the Italian kid, the Black kid. I never even thought of it like that. And I think most of you probably feel the same way. Race was not a big deal until Obama came around. America was beyond that already. We've been turned against each other by these stupid narratives, frankly. And I hope people can watch this so they can begin seeing through these stupid narratives more clearly. We've been lied to. We've been deeply lied to, and there are people trying to turn us against each other. Again, let me show you the trailer for that, then we'll jump over to Epic TV exclusively.
Throughout history, Black folks were honorable. They had integrity. That's what Black people were.
We were never taught that America was bad and that we were not Americans. We were raised to love America.
Protesters topple a statue of Christopher Columbus, and hundreds of statues have been vandalized.
You see people trying to rewrite history.
The American people know these names have to go.
Why is that?
Whenever you have something to be proud of, people have less of a chance of controlling you.
This country is racist from top to bottom, from right to left. And for Black people to become a part of that is for them to become, in fact, anti-Black and to hate themselves.
Y'all murder my friends!
There is no country in this world that a Black person would rather be.
All right, folks, again, Uncle Tom 2, now on Epic TV. If you're subscribed, you can watch it for free. Check it out. Be sure to watch it. Share it. That said, let's jump over to Epic TV. See you there. Folks, thank you so much for being here. Again, it's your support here that really makes this show possible. And so, without you, I don't know. I don't know where I'd be. I certainly wouldn't be able to do much on YouTube.